Welcome back, you guys, and welcome back to another series with Rosa. This is actually her third episode, you guys. So you guys have probably seen the last two episodes with us where we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about Rosa's background, her story. But today we really wanted to talk about the topic survival versus just being in growth and, actually, I feel like enjoying life and thriving. So
Hi everyone, it's Rosa Valentina, fellow entrepreneur. So I did recently just come back from Mexico, and that was a whole journey in of itself. And that's why we wanted to talk about survival mode, because from me starting the process of uprooting my whole life, leaving my job, everything I had with my routine, selling my car, giving up my apartment, letting go of everything and starting a whole new life in a different country. That was a whole big process that made me realize that I was in survival mode and going through it and then out of it, and now I just feel like I'm thriving on so many levels. So that's why we wanted to talk about that today.
But something we were talking about today, like before we started recording, was I think that sometimes you don't even know you're in survival mode until you get out of it. And I know for me, and I want you to talk about your experience, but I know for me, like something that I realized this morning when I was like outside and having my cafecito was that, even after I graduated college, that for me, was a huge life transition, because when you're used to like hustling or always working 24/7, and then you're so used to structure and then you don't have that structure, it was almost like I didn't even know what to do with myself outside of just working. And that was like a big example for me, where even when I moved to Arizona, I didn't realize how much I was like constantly just going and going and working. And it wasn't until really this year that I even told you, like, I feel like I finally was able to take a breath and, not have to constantly be working or growing a business, especially like in the beginning of entrepreneurship, because we all know that growing a business is hard. But I would love for you to talk about like how that has even changed for you over the years or impacted you.
And that's a good question, but I want to go back with how you've been in that survival mode.
Yes.
And even recognizing when you're in survival mode, because a lot of times when you're in that survival mode, it's like you have a blindfold on where you need to really look at yourself in the mirror to even realize that you're in that survival mode. So for me personally, and when we talk about survival mode too, we also have to realize that there's different types of reasons why you're in survival mode. Because for some people, it's the financial security of being in that stressed out mode that has you in survival mode, where you don't know how you're going to pay your bills and you have that constant financial pressure. For other people, it's simply just feeling safe, where they're in traumatic situations where they've been in it for so long that, and this is kind of maybe another topic, but their sacral chakra is really unbalanced and they're not in a place where they feel physically safe, where they're always in kind of like that stress that they don't even realize they don't feel safe enough to just relax. And there's other types of stress too, but those two are very common. And in my situation with starting a whole new life in a different country, it really was more so the financial stress of not knowing what type of job I would be getting in Mexico, where I would be getting my meals from, where I would be provided for, or just even the finances of it, like how I would be taken care of. And so recognizing when you're in survival mode starts with analyzing your behaviors, because something that I would do a lot when I was doing my transition, moving to Mexico, and in the first weeks of Mexico, was the overeating. Because for me, it would just be like people offering me food and me just eating it up, even though I was vegan, just eating whatever food they gave me. And another thing that people might do when they're in that survival mode is going back to maybe like addictive behaviors that make them feel good, where they're just constantly doing it, where maybe it's not like drugs or anything bad, but they go to those comfort things like binging on chocolate or anything that makes them feel good, and they just do on impulse, like eating junk food.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing things on impulse and trying to get that instant gratification, that's a big red flag that you're in survival mode. And when you take a step back to analyze why you're doing the impulsive things that you're doing, is when you're able to pause the survival mode, question it, and then start that process of actually doing the journey of getting out of the survival mode.
Yeah.
What about for you? What's it been like when you've recognized you've been in survival mode?
You just hit like a lot of good points, and I'm so glad that you went back to the financial and what did you say? Like the financial
actually
and
feeling safe.
Yes, being safe. Because I didn't realize for a long time, and I want to go back to that really quick, because I didn't realize for a long time how part of it was financial, because I think financial shows up for everybody, you know. But a lot of the times we don't recognize when it's a need to feel safe. And I know for me, for like a long time, even in my past relationships, like I remember staying in really toxic relationships, and it's something that we talked about just because it was uncomfortable. I didn't know if I got out of that relationship, then what would the other side be like, or vice versa, where I didn't want to get into relationships because I was like, well, what if that happens, like my old relationship, or what if that happens? So that kind of, you know, just blocked me in so many ways. But I say that to say that I think that the partner that you're with is a huge factor to feeling safe, and luckily I'm so blessed that I found a partner that makes me feel like that. But for a long time I didn't even realize what it meant to feel safe within a relationship. Like I didn't even realize what it felt to feel safe within yourself, because I didn't grow up watching that. So I think that sometimes like you don't even know how to put yourself in a safe situation until you learn from your surroundings, you learn from experience, and then you learn what is it that you like and what is it that you don't like. And going back to that, you know, that can show up and look like in so many different ways and areas, because even if you aren't necessarily talking about like a relationship or your partner, sometimes you need to feel safe within yourself, or you don't even feel safe because of things from your childhood. And I don't want to get too much off topic, but I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is a huge thing where, you know, going back to our finances impacts a lot. But I think that sometimes it's hard to even know when we're in survival mode until we get out of it, like you said, because we're either in a healthier chapter or a healthier journey of our life. But what was your question?
So with your experiences, what are some behaviors you've noticed in yourself that make you realize that you're probably in survival mode?
I like that you hit the topic on binge eating, because I think that's something that we both have experienced, is we both have had like an eating disorder. And I know for me in the past, that was a huge thing where, again, because I wanted to feel safe, I would rely on binge eating like chocolate or sugar because it made me feel safe. It made me feel like, oh, I'm okay. Like, it's that warm feeling that it gives you. And for a long time, I didn't realize that sugar and chocolate was doing that. So I would always be stuck on, well, I just have a bad relationship with food, when in reality, it's actually something in your everyday life that's happening to push you towards food, if that makes sense. So I think for me, it was one, realizing that was even stemming from me not having like a safe surrounding or what would you call it, environment, just because I was placing myself around the wrong people. I was making just choices that were probably not the best or the smartest. And so I kept feeling, like bad for myself, and like almost being a victim in every situation. And I think once you combine all those factors, it just makes you feel worse about yourself. Like you don't like yourself, you don't like your choices, and you just start developing bad relationships or bad habits in a bad relationship with food, or just things in your everyday life. But going back to that, admitting it, realizing that it was a thing, and knowing how to go around it or heal. You know, and we've talked about this over the years, is how we have continued to heal our relationship with food. But I think it's a huge factor, because we have continued to heal within ourselves. So I really think that was like a huge factor to why we continue to heal the way we do. But if that answered your question.
Yeah, that brings it exactly into what I want to go into next, which is if step one is recognizing you're even in survival mode, now how do you begin healing it and getting out of survival mode? So the next step, once you realize that you're actually in survival mode, is you need to realize what is triggering that survival mode, whether it's the financial aspect of it, the feeling safe, or any other factors of why you might be in survival mode. And again, a lot of it is subconscious. So you really need to question yourself and ask yourself those difficult questions to get to the root of what type of survival mode is being triggered. Because once you identify which type it is that's causing you to do that, then you can go in and do that trauma work, which is important that you need to identify that, because you can't approach it the same way. So for example, the way that I healed my trauma is not going to be the same way that you go through your survival trauma to heal it, because it's not the same reasons. And a lot of it has to do with your family too, whether you realize it or not. Because in my situation, it was that financial pressure where I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from. I knew that I was willing to work hard and I would be okay, but at the same time, not knowing where my meals were going to come from was very stressful. And then when I got to Mexico, I was more than provided for. I'm so grateful that I've had the mindset to start attracting the things that I want, and also a family that is very supportive and loving. Because when I got to Mexico, my family would all feed me. So I never had a meal that I wasn't eating or whatever. And then I was living with my dad too, so I didn't have to worry about rent or anything. And then just things started lining up where I did have a job that I was able to do all the way from Mexico. I really didn't have any needs. So it was really going into the subconscious thing of it and working through it to unpack it, to get out of that survival mode. Because, and this is probably something controversial, but sometimes it's yourself putting you in survival mode, not your circumstances. It's you that's putting yourself in survival mode. And so my family too, getting to know like my uncles and cousins and how my family lived in Mexico, and seeing that the poverty mindset goes back so many generations. It's something so unconscious that's been ingrained in us, that's basically in our DNA, that we have to go in and unpack and work through. And so for me, the way that I was able to get out of that survival mode after realizing what it was is working through trusting that God would provide for me, that I would be okay, and reassuring myself, and basically just working through that whole trust process. Because when you're trusting that you're taken care of, that you'll always be okay, it's a slow process where your trust just grows the more you use it. So like first day, okay, I'm gonna trust that this is gonna work out for me. And then it works out for you, and then you have more credibility. Okay, it's gonna keep working out for me. And things may come your way, but how you react to it also is very important with growing that trust muscle to get you out of the survival mode. And pretty soon, you look back at all those days that God really did take care of you, and that you never were alone. And that just creates such a big trust. And especially when you're doing the meditative work of going in and actually listening to your inner child and comforting yourself to get out of that survival mode, pretty soon you're in a place where everything is just bliss. And that's how I've been lately. Like, I feel like I've reversed aged, where I'm dressing younger than I used to. Like, I don't worry about my bills. Lately, I feel like I'm that bum or that friend that's unemployed on a random Tuesday. I don't know if you've seen that reel.
I have.
Yeah, where I literally don't worry about my rent or where I'm gonna eat or anything like that. And money just comes my way. Like, I literally have all my needs met. And I'm even going to take an opportunity where when you stop being in survival mode, you can actually let yourself dream and follow the things that actually makes your heart happy. And so I'm so grateful to be in that position now.
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful for you to even share your experience, because one of the things that I told you since the beginning is I'm so glad that you're doing what makes you happy. Because one, like, it's such a privilege, and I want to use this word again, but it's such a blessing to be able to go back to your home country and be able to do that. But most importantly, like, you're showing Yasmin, your daughter, like, what's possible. Because I think that, I can only talk about my experience, but my parents, like, if it was the other way around and I told them, like, why don't you go after your dreams, or why don't you try this, like, to them it was like I was talking Chinese or something. Like, they couldn't imagine that, just because, like you said, like, some routines or just some behavior or just some things is so ingrained in you that for them it's kind of difficult or kind of challenging for them to even think that there could be, like, another way or another path. So that's something that I've told you that I love about you, and I respected you since the beginning. Is that you're always following, like, your gut and your intuition. And I think, it's also like you're an example to, like, other women, especially other Latinas, that you can do whatever you want with your life. Like, at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong path. Like, you literally just figure it out as you go. And I know, like, are we the same age? I feel like I'm a little bit older.
Yeah, I'm 23.
Well, you're 23. I'm 27. So, that's a 5-year gap. But still, like, I love that you're doing everything that, what is the word? Makes you happy, but also, like, you're following your intuition. Because I think for me, like, that was really difficult from a young age. And that's why I'm, like, clapping for you, because I'm like, I don't think I could have ever done that, especially at 23. Like, that's scary, to move across to another country. But again, it's a huge, like, a mindset thing.
Yeah, and while we're on that, it reminded me of a phrase that stuck out to me while I was going through that process of getting out of the survival mode, is you make different decisions when you're no longer in survival mode.
That's so important.
Part of me being in that survival mode, like, you really have to question the why of your decisions and everything you do, because when you're no longer in survival mode, you start making those different decisions where, for example, if somebody's in survival mode because of financial reasons, they're gonna stay in that secure job because they think, oh, I need this job because I need to make ends meet, I need to pay for the money, versus somebody that's not in that survival mode, that is just trusting that everything is going to work out for them, just gets up and leaves that job because they know they'll be okay. And it sounds so crazy, but in reality, it has to be, like, realistic and also so crazy at the same time, because you're realistic by saying, okay, maybe I do need finances, so I'm not going to leave this job right now. But when you're getting out of that survival mode, you start aspiring for greater things that seem maybe unachievable, but you start thinking, if I want to get from point A to point B, which is have a job that's way more flexible, even as crazy as it may seem, and you start thinking about it all the time, and it brings you so much happiness, then pretty soon you're gonna start finding opportunities that align with it. So you don't necessarily have to be delusional and burn the ships or whatever, but when you're no longer in that survival mode is when you start making those different decisions. I can greatly sympathize with people and where they're at and the struggles they're facing, but it also goes back to something that a lot of people don't have personal responsibility. Because if you're in a bad situation and you keep making bad decisions that keep putting you in that bad situation instead of actually using it as traction to get out of the mud, then that's your responsibility as well. Because let me tell you this story that I found out while I was in Mexico.
That's
that
true.
just blows my mind.